You know, that feeling, that pull, that deep sense of calling to something bigger than yourself. Maybe it's starting a new initiative, launching a creative project, or stepping into a mission you believe in with all your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the practicalities hit. The questions of funding loom large.
Right.
You might even find yourself thinking, surely if this is really from God, I shouldn't have to ask for money, right? That financial hurdle can feel like this massive wall.
It really can. And as we dive into our shared resource today, 001 Fund the Mission, Fuel the Movement.pdf, we see that this feeling of hitting a financial wall often stems from what the resource calls a spiritual misbelief.
A spiritual misbelief.
Okay. Yeah, basically a clouded perspective on how provision actually works when you're pursuing a calling.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, which we've put together specifically for you, we're going to unpack this really valuable resource.
It's packed, isn't it?
It is. It's got insights across several key areas. Understanding generosity, recognizing those moments of what feel like miraculous provision, the crucial role of partnership.
Evaluating the real impact of your work, yeah, and a really grounded biblical perspective on building a sustainable mission.
And plus, it's got some great appendices, thought-provoking discussion questions, exercises for self-reflection, and practical, actionable steps you can actually take.
And our aim here isn't just to, summarize what's in the document.
Well.
It's to really extract the core wisdom and maybe offer a fresh way of looking at funding your calling. We want to help you move beyond that feeling of being a perpetual asker.
Yeah.
And towards a deeper understanding of how this process is actually about actively building the future of God's mission in the world.
Okay, so we'll be touching on a lot then. From the practical side, like raising missionary support and developing strategic fundraising approaches, to the more foundational theological ideas of provision and the absolute necessity of missional partnership.
Right. And also how to cast a compelling vision that inspires others to join you, maybe even using digital tools effectively.
All while being grounded in prayer and a spirit of faith.
Exactly. Ultimately, we'll look at how navigating this whole funding thing can actually contribute to your own leadership development and even foster generosity and, discipleship in those who partner with you.
Okay, let's really get into this then. Where does this resource first start to challenge our thinking?
Well, a foundational shift the resource encourages right from the start is in how we perceive the act of support raising itself.
Okay.
It's incredibly easy to feel like you're constantly in a position of need, just asking for handouts.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It can feel so, vulnerable.
Exactly. But the resource presents this really powerful alternative. Support raising isn't begging. Instead, it frames it as a negotiation between faith, humility, and trust, and a really dynamic way to involve God's people, helping them feel a shared sense of ownership over the mission.
That's a significant reframing. So when I'm reaching out to people, it's not.
Think of each outreach not as a burden you're placing on them, but as what the book calls a seed of mobilization.
A seed of mobilization. I like that.
Yeah. See each person you connect with not just as a potential source of funds, but as a disciple in the harvest, someone who can play an active role in what God is doing.
Oh.
And every contribution, no matter the size, isn't just money. It's a tangible declaration that the kingdom is worth it.
That completely changes my perspective. It's not about me needing something.
Precisely. You transition from feeling like someone with an outstretched hand to becoming a vision caster.
A vision caster. Okay.
You're not just asking people to support you in isolation, but inviting them to partner with something much larger, with what God is accomplishing through your calling.
Right.
The resource even suggests that those conversations you have about support can, in themselves, become meaningful moments of ministry and connection.
That's profound. It shifts the focus from my immediate need to a shared purpose.
Exactly. The resource points out that this financial support becomes the means to unlock deeper community, broader ownership, and a shared sense of eternal purpose. It's about building a team of people who are invested in the mission on multiple levels, spiritually, practically, and, even financially.
So what are some tangible ways this shift in thinking plays out, practically?
Well, the resource outlines some really practical mindset shifts. It encourages a move from reluctance to reverence.
Reluctance to reverence, okay.
Inviting you to see the act of support raising as something sacred, maybe even a privilege. It suggests shifting from desperation to discipleship, viewing each conversation as an opportunity to connect someone more deeply with God's heart for the world and their potential role in it.
That powerful.
And finally, it encourages moving from scarcity to stewardship, trusting that God isn't limited in his resources, but is actively positioning people to be obedient and generous in their giving.
Those are really powerful shifts in perspective. And the book offers concrete ways to put these into practice, right? It's not just theory.
Oh, absolutely. It emphasizes the importance of intentional prayer over your contact list before you even reach out.
Okay.
The idea that prayer creates a different foundation for those conversations.
Right.
And it strongly advocates for the power of storytelling,
Yes.
focusing on sharing narratives of impact and transformation rather than just, throwing statistics at people. The resource argues that a compelling vision is communicated most effectively through the stories of lives being changed.
That totally resonates. People connect with stories. They want to see the why behind the what.
And the resource also highlights the strategic use of digital tools, how you can use them to expand your reach, clarify your message, and make it easier for people to join you in partnership.
But it's not just about the tools themselves.
No, exactly. It's careful to emphasize that the effectiveness of these tools hinges on that underlying shift in your own identity.
Which, according to the book, is less beggar, more.
Oh, right. You are not a beggar or an inconvenience. You are a vision bearer, someone carrying a vital message, a bridge builder, connecting people to a purpose larger than themselves, a mission mobilizer, inviting others into active participation.
Vision bearer, bridge builder, mission mobilizer. I like those.
Yeah. And your support team isn't just a collection of donors. It's described as a living ecosystem of faith, love, and shared obedience. A community of people united by a common purpose.
That's such a powerful image, that interconnectedness.
The journey, the resource explains, is one of moving from fear to faith. It's about truly embracing the reality that providing for the mission isn't solely your responsibility,
Right.
but a promise from God that he often fulfills through the partnership of others, activated by prayer. And this understanding, it naturally leads to a new way of evaluating success.
Beyond just the financial bottom line, measuring something different.
Exactly. The resource challenges us to adopt what we might call a kingdom scorecard. Looking at the breadth of lives touched by the mission, the depth of faith formed in those involved, both those you serve and those who support, and the ripple effect of the gospel advancing through every partnership that's formed. It's about recognizing the holistic impact, the community you build, the eternal significance.
And that feeling of dread, around asking for support that we started with, how does it reframe that?
It reframes that too. It suggests that what we often anticipate with anxiety, that seemingly awkward request for partnership, could actually be the very gateway to significant spiritual and missional breakthroughs.
Wow, really?
Yeah, like a divinely appointed summit, an invitation for others to actively partner with God in something far greater than any individual effort.
This perspective really elevates the entire process, doesn't it? It's not just a means to an end, but an integral and meaningful part of the mission itself.
Precisely. Yeah. And the resource then delves into the strong biblical foundations that underpin this way of thinking. It emphasizes a core principle. God himself provides for the work that he initiates.
Okay, can you give us a specific example from the resource?
Sure. The book highlights the account in Exodus 35:36, describing the giving toward the construction of the tabernacle.
Right, yeah.
The people were so moved to contribute to God's plan that they brought far more than was needed, to the point where Moses actually had to ask them to stop giving.
That's amazing.
The powerful insight here is that God has a way of stirring people's hearts to support his purposes with abundance.
So that desire to give isn't something we have to somehow conjure up in people on our own.
Exactly. The resource emphasizes that partnership isn't some new strategy. It's echoed throughout Scripture. God's choice to work through people isn't a sign of his limitations, but rather his desire for us to actively participate in his redemptive work. His provision often comes through the generosity, good stewardship, and active involvement of others. Mutual partnership in funding a mission isn't a secondary strategy. It's actually central to the biblical narrative.
And this isn't just an Old Testament idea, is it? It carries through.
Not at all. The resource points to Abraham's journey in Genesis 14, where God's promise was coupled with provision through figures like Melchizedek.
Ah, yes.
It also highlights how the early church in the New Testament was sustained through the committed support of believers for the apostles and their ministry.
Right.
Even the Apostle Paul in Philippians 4 gratefully acknowledges the financial contributions of the Philippian church, describing them as a fragrant offering, recognizing their giving as spiritual participation in advancing the gospel.
So when people contribute financially, they're not just covering expenses, they're actually engaging in the spiritual work itself, like actively participating.
That's a crucial understanding. The resource emphasizes that God intentionally chooses to work through people, creating this dynamic tension between his ultimate sovereignty and our human responsibility. He certainly has the power to provide in countless ways, but he often chooses to involve us in the process.
Okay, what about those regular update letters that missionaries and ministries send? They can sometimes feel like just another way of asking for money, you know?
Yeah, that's a fair point. The resource offers a valuable reframing of those as well. It suggests that update letters should be seen as opportunities for genuine connection and deeper engagement.
How so?
Well, they are a chance to show your partners the tangible impact of their contributions, to share stories of transformation, and to invite them further into the spiritual journey of the mission. Writing with authenticity, gratitude, and joy helps your supporters feel the vital role they play. It's connection, not just reporting.
It's about seeing provision itself as an act of worship, right? I think the resource mentions that.
Precisely. The resource describes it as a fragrant aroma that rises to God and actively advances his kingdom. It draws a connection back to the Old Testament covenants, where God's blessings were intended to flow through his people.
Okay.
The offerings for the tabernacle and the temple, given willingly and engaging the hearts of the community, served as powerful models of worship through generosity.
So, viewed through this lens, actively seeking support becomes almost a spiritual discipline in itself. Is that what it's saying?
That's exactly how the resource presents it, a tangible way of embodying God's own generosity and reflecting the interconnected, loving relationship within the Trinity, the perichoresis.
Wow.
The acts of giving and receiving become mutual expressions of a shared commitment to God and his purposes.
This theological grounding really does shift the entire perspective. It feels less transactional.
Exactly.
So how does this translate into more practical ways of building these kinds of partnerships? What does the resource suggest we actually do?
Okay, yeah, the resource offers several key practical strategies. First, it stresses the importance of crafting a truly compelling vision.
The why.
Absolutely the why.
Yeah.
You need to be able to articulate clearly why your mission matters deeply. Who will be impacted? How will their lives be changed? What's the eternal significance? And crucially, it emphasizes using vivid personal stories to paint that picture.
Real examples.
Yeah, sharing real examples of transformation rather than just presenting abstract goals or statistics.
So not just stating what you want to do, but showing the human impact. That makes sense. What else?
Second, it highlights the importance of strategically mapping and mobilizing your existing networks.
Okay, like who you know.
Yeah, thinking intentionally about your close friends and family, your church community, your professional connections, who's already in your circle. Third, the resource strongly encourages inviting multiple forms of partnership.
So not just money.
Definitely not just money. Recognizing that support can come in many ways. Prayer, sharing practical skills, offering expertise, leveraging your partner's own networks.
So really seeing people as more than just potential sources of funding, as whole people.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating genuine, reciprocal relationships, viewing your partners as true co-laborers in the mission.
Co-laborers, I like that term.
Yeah, and this involves sharing a sense of spiritual ownership, recognizing that when partners pray for the mission and contribute in any way, they are actively participating in its spiritual leadership.
Okay.
This kind of partnership also fosters deeper spiritual growth and discipleship, both for the person serving and for those who come alongside them through sacrificial giving and a strengthening of their own faith.
The book even shares a specific illustration of this kind of partnership in action, doesn't it? The Anna and Tom story.
Yes, exactly. It tells the story of Anna, a missionary, and Tom, a retiree. And Tom's seemingly modest financial gift wasn't just a transaction for Anna's ministry.
Right.
It sparked a renewed sense of purpose and joy in his own life. Anna realized that her need became an opportunity for Tom to experience the blessing of giving, and their interaction became this act of mutual encouragement and worship.
It really underscores that the impact of partnership flows in both directions. It's not a one-way street.
Precisely. The resource emphasizes the transformative power inherent in genuine partnership, including ongoing discipleship through consistent communication and shared prayer.
And it gets practical too, right? Like how to start these.
Yeah, it offers practical steps for initiating and nurturing these partnerships. Things like developing a concise and compelling 3-minute narrative about your calling and vision.
Like an elevator pitch, but more vision-focused.
Kinda, yeah. Hosting small kingdom conversations to connect with people on a deeper, more relational level, and even creating a partnership covenant to establish shared expectations and commitments.
A covenant. Interesting. So it's not just about making an appeal, it's about building a collaborative effort, a real team.
Exactly. The resource concludes that reframing support raising in this holistic way transforms hearts, builds strong communities, and beautifully demonstrates God's character as the ultimate provider who often works through the generosity of his people.
So every invitation is an opportunity for worship.
Every act of giving a declaration of faith, and every partnership a living testament to hope in action.
This is all incredibly helpful in shifting the mindset. But, what about when you actually step out to build these partnerships? There are bound to be challenges and setbacks, right? It's not always easy.
Oh, the resource certainly doesn't shy away from that reality. Not at all. It addresses the spiritual dimension, acknowledging that there could be spiritual opposition in the process of support raising.
Really?
Yeah, forces that seek to discourage and undermine those pursuing God's call. This is why, as the resource points out, faithfulness in the seemingly small things like what Jesus talks about in Luke 16:10 becomes so vital.
What kind of small things?
Things like meticulous record keeping, consistent communication with partners, even being open to feedback from them. These details matter.
Seeing the support raising phase as an integral part of the calling itself seems key to developing that kind of perseverance, doesn't it? Not just a hurdle to jump over.
Absolutely. The resource emphasizes that seeking support isn't a detour or an obstacle to overcome before the real work starts. It's an essential part of being equipped and prepared for the work ahead.
Okay.
It reframes the challenges, suggesting that God isn't testing your worthiness through the struggle, but rather building your capacity for greater expectancy,
Yeah.
like in Ephesians 3:2a.
Expectancy.
Yeah, you'll likely experience moments of immediate provision, like manna, alongside times where you see God multiply resources in unexpected ways. It's important to remain open to all the ways he might choose to provide.
And stewarding those resources, both big and small, with absolute integrity is so important, honoring God and partners.
Indeed. Maintaining transparent financial practices and viewing every conversation about support as significant and, well, sacred. The resource also offers a helpful reframing of fear.
How does it tackle fear? Because that's a big one for many people.
It suggests that when we surrender our anxieties to Christ, those very fears can become the foundation upon which resilience is built, like an obstacle being transformed into an altar of dependence, using that weakness for his strength, like Paul talks about.
That's a really powerful image of transformation.
Mm.
Wow. And it seems like authenticity in this whole process is crucial for building genuine trust with potential partners. You can't fake this stuff.
Exactly. Sharing your personal story, being honest about the challenges you face, this allows people to connect with you on a human level, not just as a representative of a ministry or organization.
Yeah.
And the resource reminds us that true kingdom joy is found in active participation with God in his work. Celebrating every act of generosity, no matter the size, and expressing that genuine joy in your communication can be incredibly impactful and encouraging to your partners.
It becomes a living, breathing testimony to God's faithfulness in real time for everyone involved.
Precisely. The resource draws on historical examples, pointing out that God has consistently worked through relational provision. Think about the support of the Levites in the Old Testament, or Paul's direct appeals for partnership in the New Testament.
Right.
Seeking support in this way breaks down the illusion of self-sufficiency and weaves those in ministry into the wider fabric of the community of faith. It's about actively dismantling the often crippling myths of fear and potential failure that can so easily creep into our thinking.
Having a well-prepared vision packet and maybe like a collection of stories that illustrate God's faithfulness in the past, that sounds like an invaluable tool in this process.
Absolutely. These resources help you move beyond simply making requests to inviting people to share in the genuine joy of seeing God at work and witnessing others find their meaningful place in the mission.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the resource reframes the entire support-raising journey, not as a burdensome task, but as a pilgrimage of joy, a journey of faith undertaken in partnership with God and his people.
A pilgrimage of joy. I like that much better than fundraising grind.
Okay, this has been such an insightful exploration so far. It really does challenge those initial feelings of reluctance and reframe the whole perspective.
And the resource delves even deeper, specifically exploring the theology that underpins provision and partnership.
Yeah.
It beautifully portrays God as the ultimate initiator and funder of his work.
The ultimate fundraiser, yeah.
Yeah, in a way, inviting us into partnership in his grand redemptive plan, like Paul hints at in Philippians 4:20c, where he expresses his desire for the spiritual fruit to increase in the Philippians account because of their giving.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that every individual invited to participate in this journey is presented with an opportunity to actively obey God and align their resources with his purposes.
So it's as much about the spiritual growth of the giver, the partner, as it is about the practical needs of the mission itself.
Exactly. Giving that flows from a heart aligned with God's will is itself an act of worship, powerfully illustrated by the widow's offering.
Okay. The concept of radical generosity reflects God's own heart for the world, as vividly seen in John 3:16. And God's consistent provision, particularly in challenging circumstances like the Israelites' journey in the wilderness, serves to cultivate deeper trust and dependence on him.
Right.
It's this beautiful ongoing interplay, this dance between God's initiative and our faithful response, our obedience.
It shifts the idea of provision from simply meeting material needs to becoming a pathway for a more profound and intimate relationship with God, for everyone involved.
Precisely. The resource underscores that the concept of partnership isn't new. It has biblical precedent stretching all the way back to Eden, highlighting God's consistent choice to work through human participation. This mutual blessing inherent in covenant relationships like with Abraham, and the shared responsibility and stewardship foster a strong sense of community, build trust, and result in mutual spiritual benefit.
Like Paul and the Philippians again.
Exactly. Paul's close partnership with the Philippian church was centered around their shared responsibility in advancing the kingdom of God.
It's a constant dance, it seems, between fully trusting in God's sovereignty, knowing he's in control, and actively embracing our human responsibility in the area of provision, planning, asking.
That's right. And while unwavering faith is essential, the resource also cautions against what it calls over-spiritualizing budget planning.
What does that mean?
It's the idea that faith somehow negates the need for good stewardship and practical planning. Like, oh, I'll just pray and the money will appear.
Right, faith without works.
Kinda. We see numerous examples of human partnership and leadership throughout Scripture, like David relying on his loyal followers. Cultivating a lifestyle of trust involves being intentional about tracking God's promises, our specific needs, and our prayers.
Okay.
Recognizing his faithfulness as we see prayers answered, often through unexpected avenues. Just keeping track helps build faith.
The powerful stories of Elijah being provided for by the widow in a time of famine, and Jesus miraculously feeding the 5,000 with just a few loaves and fish. Those really bring that principle of God providing through unexpected and seemingly limited means to life, don't they?
They really do. Ultimately, the resource concludes that the act of support raising is, at its core, an invitation.
An invitation for people.
Yeah, an invitation for people to actively participate in the very work of God's kingdom. The ultimate provider is always at work, and joining in that work through partnership is a truly divine adventure.
So the focus shifts.
Right. The primary focus should be on cultivating strong community and building meaningful relationships that will provide long-term sustainability for the mission. True success is measured by God's faithfulness in providing all that is needed.
So it's less about just getting money.
And far more about giving people a tangible opportunity to obey God and experience the joy of contributing. And the resource reminds us not to unintentionally rob others of that blessing by assuming they can't or won't want to give.
Don't make assumptions about people's capacity or willingness to be generous. That's good. Okay, as the resource continues, does it get into different ways partnership can actually look? Different models?
It does. It offers further practical insights by exploring various models of partnership and key organizational considerations. It draws wisdom from biblical examples like the collaboration between Moses and his father-in-law Jethro.
The delegation advice.
Exactly. Partnership often starts with recognizing limitation, and wisdom can come from unexpected sources. It also looks at Elijah relying on the widow, how God-ordained support might look insufficient until faith activates it.
And Paul's tent making.
Yeah, Paul's strategic approach of tent making, providing for himself through marketplace engagement, sometimes for credibility or access, it shows flexibility in support models is key. There might even be hybrid models, blending self-sufficiency with external support.
Or even modern things like, I don't know, digital nomad missionary.
Exactly, leveraging global connectivity. The resource discusses the strengths and challenges of different approaches like direct missionary support, which offers ownership, but means the individual does all the fundraising.
Which can be daunting.
Right. Versus team-based support, sharing the load, but maybe requiring more coordination. Understanding the nuances helps you make informed decisions.
And what about mission agencies? How do they fit in?
They play a crucial role, often providing administrative, logistical, and accountability support. The key there, the resource suggests, is having clear covenants, maintaining a relational focus, and ensuring mutual feedback between the missionary and the agency.
It all comes back to that shift from begging to co-laboring and partnership mobilization.
Yes, and it highlights that prayer partnership is absolutely vital, serving as both the foundation and the ongoing power source for the mission. It's not secondary, it's primary.
That's a really important reminder.
It also touches on the historical evolution of support models within the church and reaffirms that foundational theological truth. God consistently provides for his work through his people.
Which means accountability is huge.
Absolutely. Reciprocal accountability, stewarding trust through transparency. And it suggests peer consultation, talking with others, doing similar work for clarity, strategy, refinement, and just building confidence.
Okay, so we have mindset shifts, biblical foundations, practical strategies, handling challenges, theology, different models. What else does the resource cover? It seems pretty comprehensive.
It really is. Towards the end, it powerfully explores the importance of unity, the power of together, and then circles back to definitively reframe fundraising itself as partnership and mobilization.
The power of together, synergy and unity. What does it say about that?
It uses beautiful language, talking about God's design, calling for divine ensemble, the symphony of the saints. It points to the Trinity as the ultimate model of mutuality and unity within distinctiveness, that idea of perichoresis again.
How does that apply practically?
Things like establishing corporate prayer rhythms across different ministries, intentionally learning about what others are doing, celebrating shared wins. It gives an example of a Southeast Asian church network and Western NGOs collaborating effectively in disaster relief because they prioritized unity.
That's powerful. But unity can be hard to maintain.
It can. The resource talks about historical fractures in the church and their negative impact on witness. It reframes collaboration as witness, echoing Jesus' prayer in John 17.
So, practical steps to build unity.
Things like cross-ministry humility, shared prayer initiatives, supporting local ecumenical hubs, forming cross-denominational teams for specific projects, joint planning retreats. It highlights the power of partnership and church planting networks, sharing finances, mentorship, resources leading to faster leadership development and greater credibility.
It sounds like the early church model almost, Acts.
Exactly. The resource contrasts this with the challenges of isolation, individualism, insecurity, just plain busyness, and the negative consequences like duplication of effort, burnout, and a diminished collective witness. It even suggests a kind of connection quotient self-assessment.
Okay, so unity is vital. And then how does it finally nail down this reframing of fundraising?
It really emphasizes that the language we use shapes the identity of both the mission and the partners. Moving from fundraising to mobilizing partners isn't just semantics. It's a strategic and theological recalibration. It restores dignity to the process.
Fundraising sounds transactional, maybe implies scarcity or obligation.
Right. Whereas mobilizing partners speaks to invitation, collaboration, shared vision. It draws heavily on Paul, again, especially Philippians, emphasizing koinonia, partnership or fellowship in the gospel, which is about spiritual communion and mutual investment, not just financial support.
And Paul used grace, not guilt, in asking for support.
Absolutely. Like in 2 Corinthians 8, giving is an internal overflow of grace. Reclaiming that early church vision of koinonia changes everything: relationships, leadership, how ministry happens. We become mobilizers, co-laborers in grace.
So the goal isn't just a full bank account.
No, it's fruitful mission. Relationships over revenue, calling over convenience. It means crafting partner-centric invitations, focusing on their role in God's work, using authentic storytelling, not slick salesmanship.
And recognizing all forms of partnership, again, prayer, time, skills, advocacy.
Yes, the body of Christ has many essential parts, as 1 Corinthians 12 says. It means consciously changing language and appeals to co-laboring, shared vision, shared purpose, elevating prayer, celebrating every contribution. Mobilizing partners becomes a divine calling itself.
Support raising as an altar of partnership.
Yeah.
Laying down pride, affirming community.
Beautifully put. It becomes koinonia in practice.
Okay, one more big theme seems to be this idea of dependence and faith through the process, the ascent of dependence.
Yes, that's a key concept near the end. It frames support raising as a crucible of faith, a journey of ascending into deeper reliance on God. Vulnerability becomes a conduit for grace. Even asking, send prayer, or consider a gift is presented as an act of holy surrender.
And dealing with rejection.
Perseverance is forged in rejection. Setbacks hone resolve. It's part of the ascent. The resource suggests practical disciplines like prayerful goal setting, having partners pray with you, partner prayer communion, transparency journaling, and celebrating milestones along the way.
How does this ascent fit into the overall strategy?
It suggests vision-first funding lead with the why and maybe team-based ascent, sharing the journey. It affirms God's pleasure in providing, often using His people like in Exodus or Acts 2. We work out our calling with courage, resting in His work in us.
Identifying those faith-forming moments.
Exactly. Seeing the journey as a tapestry of trust. Naming the threads of God's faithfulness, journaling about them, sharing the story, cultivating spirit sensitivity, listening prayer, even interpreting dreams related to provision. It's a dance of obedience.
And moving from fear to faith requires action, right? Not just thinking about it.
Right. The resource has great journaling prompts. Identify fears, explore their roots, challenge the negative narrative, reframe with scripture, embrace God's promises, identify small steps of faith, reflect on past faithfulness, small acts reclaim ground from fear.
Praying for specific things, too.
Yes, praying for kingdom-minded partners, spiritual synergy, divine appointments, not just for the funds themselves, and avoiding pitfalls. Prayer and planning must work together. Vision and vulnerability are stronger than guilt. Excellence is worship, interdependence, not unhealthy dependency.
The power of testimony seems huge here, too.
Absolutely. It reminds everyone of God's faithfulness and anchors the ministry and relationship. Regularly reviewing, reflecting, acting with intention, practicing gratitude. It all builds that muscle of faith.
This leads naturally into the final big area, doesn't it? Vision casting for partnership. You mentioned vision throughout, but the resource really focuses on it.
It does. It strongly argues that money follows meaning. Transformational collaboration is driven by a shared vision. It talks about anchoring partnerships in divine covenants, not just transactional agreements.
So practically, how do you build that?
Discern the vision through prayer. Articulate it with vivid language and stories. Invite authentic offering, time, talent, treasure. Celebrate milestones together. Equip partners for ownership. Covenant over contract. Spirit-empowered alignment.
It points to the early church again.
Yes, Acts 1-4 is a case study of explosive growth fueled by a shared Spirit-given vision. It talks about needing rituals of renewal to keep revisiting the why. Avoid transactional shortcuts. Jesus' kingdom-centered appeal. The radical generosity in Acts 4 all flowed from vision.
How do you communicate that vision effectively?
Story-saturated updates, inviting whole-life offerings using narrative examples, defining the vision with simplicity and precision. The power of why, it gives a real-world illustration of a youth ministry transformed by clarifying its core purpose.
So a clear vision shapes culture, unites people, multiplies impact.
Exactly. Effective vision casting choreographs an encounter between divine purpose and human longing. It calls people into the vision, stirs their spirits, awakens faith. Think of Jesus' parables, the Great Commission vision with a mandate.
And the vision needs to stay alive, right? Attuned to the Spirit.
Yes, like Paul being redirected in Acts 16. The danger is a theology of control, where our stewardship plans try to substitute for God's leading, or where we get lost in spreadsheets and lose the fire.
So how do you craft a compelling vision statement?
The resource suggests elements like divine burden, what breaks God's heart, future longing, what could be, its connection to God's larger mission. Make it concise, test it, integrate it everywhere. Vision leadership is both priestly, connecting people to God, and prophetic, pointing to the future.
Proverbs 29.18, where there is no vision, the people perish or cast off restraint.
Exactly. Absence of vision leads to fragmentation. It gives a case study of a coalition that failed because it lacked a unifying why. In collaborative settings, define the why before the what, paint a clear picture. Vision is the covenant glue.
It even provides tools like worksheets.
Yes, a vision crafting worksheet, a stakeholder vision alignment map tools to help align everyone, donors, volunteers, leaders, with the vision. It's about embodying that compelling vision.
Which connects directly to the very last section, doesn't it? The power of purpose, crafting the case for support.
Precisely. It's a sacred partnership between purpose, the vision, and passion, the story. It frames our individual stories within God's big story, the ultimate meta-narrative. It talks about the imago Dei and the inherent mutuality in partnership.
How do you craft that purpose-driven case?
Define the tension, the brokenness God wants to address. Illuminate the divine plot, how God is at work. Clarify your unique role, weave in your personal story, align it with kingdom outcomes, and make a clear invitation to partner.
And train the whole team.
Yes, train the team for relational fundraising, leverage multi-channel storytelling, video, print, digital. Avoid the perils of a transactional mindset, donor fatigue, mission drift. Lead with narrative integrity.
It mentions Jesus' parables and Paul's testimony as models.
Right. Visual storytelling, the power of a calling story. Divine encounter, redirection, new identity, purpose. Story is the soul's language. Neuroscience even shows how narrative creates connection. Neural coupling, mirror neurons.
So the case for support should be biblically grounded, emotionally resonant.
Yes, outline the problem. Framing brokenness through God's eyes, a sacred summons. Present the hero, implicitly, God working through the mission. Show God's intervention. Cast the vision, provide evidence, lives changed. Tell him what you see, and make the invitation.
The invitation as a sacred partnership again.
Exactly. More than a transaction. Prayer is foundational. Financial support is sowing into the kingdom. It contrasts weak case statements with strong ones that engage emotionally and connect personally.
It sounds like the call itself is central, that divine empowerment.
Yes, understanding your call is a response to God's invitation, like Moses, Paul, recognizing conflict is normal, trusting divine provision, and prayer partnerships are highlighted again as vital, relational, spiritual callings.
Building a movement requires really knowing your audience, having that clear case, a message map.
Right, and communicating inclusively, structuring the story for impact, being authentic like Paul was, always keeping the eternal perspective, we're co-workers in God's service, investing in the kingdom, and finding joy in giving as a reflection of God's generosity.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, the core takeaway from this deep dive into fund the mission, fuel the movement, is really that funding a calling isn't just about securing financial resources, is it?
Precisely. It's fundamentally about cultivating meaningful partnerships and actively participating together in God's transformative mission in the world. It absolutely transcends a mere financial transaction and becomes a deeply relational, profoundly spiritual, and ultimately collaborative endeavor.
I definitely need to go back through my notes and revisit this resource with this completely new perspective. I'm really eager to think through how these principles can be practically applied in my own unique context.
And that's exactly what we encourage you to do. Take some time to consider how intentionally shifting your language and your underlying mindset could unlock not only the necessary financial provision for your calling, but also, maybe even more importantly, a far deeper sense of community, stronger relationships with those who partner with you, and a much more profound sense of shared purpose in the work you're doing.
So the final thought is maybe a question for us all.
Yeah, maybe ask yourself, what is one small, concrete step you can take today to begin moving away from simply thinking about fundraising and toward actively engaging in partnership mobilization?
That's a really powerful question to sit with. A great place to start.
And the resource itself offers so much more to explore, remember. Don't forget to spend some time reflecting on the discussion questions provided in the appendices, working through the reflective exercises, and considering the practical applications suggested for continued learning and growth in this absolutely vital area of living out your calling.